You mentioned the MMR scandal early in this conversation, and I still remember that, and certainly I think it did set back our field of autism research, probably for about 10 years. And it was based on quite a small sample. Andrew Wakefield publishing in the Lancet, a relatively small scale study, that children who'd received the MMR vaccine, often seemed to develop signs of autism very soon after the vaccination. And that caused a kind of public panic amongst lots of parents not to vaccinate their child. But also it set the field off into a direction where they then had to either prove or disprove this theory that the MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, was causing autism. And it took about 10 years to disprove it, and a lot of money. But it turned out to be, I suppose you could argue that in some areas of science, you do need to go down a particular road to falsify a hypothesis, not just to confirm it. But there, it led to studies, for example, looking at large populations where half the population had been vaccinated and half hadn't, in places like Denmark and Japan, and comparing autism rates across the two halves of the population and actually finding no difference. So it sort of disproved the theory using big data, but it takes time to disprove it. And along the way, lots of parents had stopped vaccinating their children, and as a result, the rates of measles went up quite dangerously high. So it was at some cost.
I live and work from the People's Republic of Lewis, East Sussex, just near Brighton, and there are many things I like about this place. And one of I was living here in the wake of that scandal, and feeling hugely frustrated at maybe particularly the BBC, but the need for balance, to have editorial balance of somebody who had an opinion and a belief versus science. And I'm sure you were involved in many of those frustrating debates. But of course, in Lewis and Brighton, there was this dip below herd immunity. There was this rush away from vaccine, and some very serious cases of measles. And I know that there were some deaths as well. So I absolutely feel that. I mean, I mentioned in the introduction, I mentioned Centre About Science being set up in the wake of that, and I think they've done some really interesting work. When we had Tracy on, she was talking about the All Trials campaign, which I think is another campaign that you talk about, kind of academic journals improving. And I wasn't aware, actually. It's a while since I've been publishing academic papers, but I wasn't aware that many journals are now saying you need to have a replication cohort. I think that is a net positive, even if it's come out of some bad science that's been published before.
Yeah, and I think particularly in the field of human genetics, we're seeing journals have that as a prerequisite, just because there were too many decades where findings weren't replicating. So, the editors are taking a kind of sensible and cautious approach, and asking the authors, the scientists, the researchers themselves, let's see if you can replicate your own work in, an independent sample.
To find out what kind of data storyteller you are, why not take our data storytelling scorecard? It takes just 2 minutes to complete and will give you a personalized report right away. Visit data-storytelling.scoreapp.com or follow the link in the show notes.